Welcome, dear traveller. Tonight, there is nowhere to rush, nothing to solve, and nothing expected of you except to get comfortable. Settle into your favourite blanket, let your shoulders soften, and allow the quiet rhythm of this story to carry you gently towards sleep. In this journey, we'll wander back to a world before electricity, where nights belong to darkness, flickering candlelight, crackling fireplaces, and the slow turning of the stars above. Without glowing screens or buzzing alarms, people followed the peaceful rhythm of sunset and sunrise, filling the long evenings with simple routines, whispered conversations, and restful silence. As we explore the forgotten habits of bedtime from centuries ago, let every detail become softer, slower, and calmer. There is no need to stay awake for every word. Simply close your eyes whenever they become heavy, breathe slowly, and let the gentle history of the night guide you into deep, peaceful sleep. Take a moment and imagine something that is almost impossible today. You are standing in the middle of a small town just after sunset. The last orange light has slipped below the hills. Shops are closing. Farmers are walking home. A blacksmith wipes the sweat from his face and lets the fire in his forge slowly die. One by one, wooden doors creak shut. Then, something happens that most of us rarely experience anymore. The world becomes truly dark. Not the kind of dark where your phone screen lights up your face. Not the kind where streetlights glow outside your window, or where a passing car sweeps its headlights across your bedroom ceiling. This is a darkness so complete that on a cloudy night you might struggle to see your own hand stretched out in front of you. For thousands of years, this was simply normal. Before electricity, night was not just the end of the day, it was almost a different world. It had its own sounds, its own rules, and its own rhythm. People did not stay awake until midnight watching television, scrolling through social media, or telling themselves just one more video, only to somehow end up watching a documentary about ancient toilets at 2 a.m. No, when the sun disappeared, life changed almost instantly. And tonight, that is exactly where our story begins. So, if you're comfortable, settle in, relax, and let your mind wander back to a time when every sunset reminded people that daylight was precious, candles were expensive, and the moon was often the brightest thing they would see all night. It is easy to think that people in the past simply went to bed as soon as it got dark. While that sometimes happened, the truth is much more interesting. For most of human history, people lived by the sky. The rising sun told them when to wake. The position of the sun helped them judge the time. The setting sun reminded them that whatever work remained would probably have to wait until tomorrow. Without electric lights, there was no easy way to turn night back into day. Today, if your kitchen is dark, you press a switch. If your office is dark, another switch. If your phone battery is low, you probably panic for a few seconds before finding a charger. Centuries ago, light required work. Someone had to make candles. Someone had to collect lamp oil. Someone had to gather wood for the fire. Every minute of extra light cost money, time, or effort. Because of that, darkness was not something people tried to defeat. It was something they learned to live with. As evening arrived, towns slowly became quieter. The loud sounds of business faded away. Market stalls packed up their goods. Children were called home. The smell of bread from ovens mixed with smoke drifting from fireplaces. Animals settled into their barns or pens. Even the air seemed different after sunset. If you stood outside long enough, you would begin to hear things that daytime usually covered up. Owls calling in the distance, The soft chirping of crickets, the wind moving through trees, the occasional bark of a dog that probably believed every leaf blowing down the road was a serious threat to public safety. Without engines, airplanes, traffic, or humming electrical machines, the night could be astonishingly quiet. That silence could be peaceful, but it could also feel unsettling. Darkness made familiar places seem unfamiliar. A road you had walked every day suddenly looked mysterious. A tree could appear to be a person. A pile of rocks might become a lurking animal, at least until you got close enough to discover that your terrifying monster was, in fact, just a pile of rocks doing absolutely nothing. Human imagination has always worked overtime in the dark. That is one reason stories about ghosts, strange creatures, and mysterious visitors often begin at night. When people could not clearly see what surrounded them, their minds happily filled in the missing details, and usually those details were not very comforting. Still, night was not simply something to fear. It was also a time for rest. After long days filled with farming, building, cooking, washing, sewing, carrying water, and countless other tasks, most people were exhausted. Life before modern machines demanded physical effort almost every day. There were no robotic vacuum cleaners, no washing machines, no dishwashers, no tractors. Even simple jobs often took hours. When darkness finally arrived, it offered something valuable, a reason to stop working. That may sound obvious, but in today's world, work often follows us everywhere. Emails arrive late at night. Messages buzz on our phones. Many people answer work questions while lying in bed. Before electricity, nature itself often declared, "That's enough for today." Of course, there were exceptions. Night watchmen stayed awake. Travelers sometimes continued under moonlight. Doctors, midwives, and guards might be called out at any hour. But for most ordinary people, nighttime meant slowing down. The pace of life became softer. Homes glowed with small fires or dim candles. Families gathered together. Conversations became quieter. Outside, the stars stretched across the sky in a way that many modern people rarely get to experience. Without city lights filling the air with brightness, the Milky Way often shined overhead like a pale river crossing the heavens. For many people, those stars were familiar companions. They helped travelers find their way. They marked the passing seasons. They inspired stories handed down through generations. Looking upward was entertainment, education, and sometimes even comfort. The moon also played a much bigger role than it does today. A full moon could completely change an evening. Roads became easier to travel. Neighbors visited each other. Workers sometimes used the extra light to finish important jobs. A moonless night, on the other hand, could feel incredibly dark. People noticed these changes because natural light mattered. Every phase of the moon shaped daily life in small but meaningful ways. As we begin this journey through history, one thing becomes clear. Sleep before electricity was about far more than lying down and closing your eyes. It was shaped by firelight, weather, seasons, fear, community, hard work, and the simple fact that humans could not command the night the way we do today. In the chapters ahead, we will step inside ordinary homes, discover what beds were really like, learn why many people actually slept twice each night, and uncover the surprising habits that disappeared once electric lights changed the world forever. For now, though, the sun has set. The village has grown quiet. The candles burn low, and somewhere beyond the rooftops, under a sky crowded with stars, another long night has just begun. Long before anyone climbed into bed, the evening had already begun its quiet work. Today, many of us decide it's bedtime almost by accident. We look at the clock, realize it is somehow 11:47 p.m. and promise ourselves that tomorrow we will definitely go to bed earlier. Tomorrow, of course, often has other plans. For people before electricity, bedtime was not a surprise. It slowly arrived with the setting sun. The fading daylight acted like the world's oldest reminder. There were no alarms telling you to start getting ready for bed, no bedtime apps, no blue light filters. Nature handled the schedule, and nature was surprisingly consistent. As the afternoon light began to soften, people knew they only had a limited amount of time left to finish the day's work. For farming families, this was one of the busiest parts of the day. Animals needed to be brought in from fields before darkness settled across the countryside. Chickens had to be safely tucked into their coops, where they would be protected from foxes or other hungry visitors. Sheep and goats were gathered into pens. Horses were brushed down after a day of pulling wagons or ploughs. Anyone who forgot an animal outside might spend the next morning wondering why there were fewer chickens than yesterday. Nature was not always a polite neighbour. Inside the house there was just as much to do. Water had to be carried from a nearby well or stream. That might sound like a simple job, but imagine needing every drop of water for drinking, cooking, washing, and cleaning, all without turning a faucet. Every bucket was lifted by hand. Every trip took time. Every spilled drop meant another walk. Firewood was another evening priority. The family hearth was more than a fireplace. It was the heart of the home. It cooked meals. It provided warmth. It offered light. In many houses, it was the only reliable source of all three. Someone had to make sure enough wood had been gathered before darkness arrived. Walking through a forest at night, looking for firewood, was not anyone's idea of a relaxing evening. So the woodpile was carefully checked. Logs were stacked. Kindling was prepared. The fire itself demanded constant attention. Unlike modern heating systems, it could not simply be turned on with a push of a button. Someone had to feed it, watch it, and make sure it stayed under control. A neglected fire could go out. A careless fire could burn down the entire house. Neither option was ideal. As smoke drifted from chimneys, the smell of supper filled villages and towns. For many families, the evening meal was the largest meal of the day. It came after hours of physical labor, when everyone had earned a good dinner. What was on the table depended on where and when people lived. Some enjoyed bread with thick vegetable stew. Others had cheese, onions, beans, or salted meat if they were fortunate. Fresh fruit appeared during the right seasons. In coastal villages, fish might replace meat. In farming communities, meals often reflected whatever had been harvested most recently. The menu was simple, but after a long day of work, simple food could taste wonderful. Dinner was rarely rushed. Families sat together whenever possible. They shared news from the day. Children listened while adults talked about crops, weather, neighbors, or plans for tomorrow. Stories were told. Advice was given. Sometimes disagreements happened because families have always been families. Human nature, it seems, has changed a lot less than technology. Once the meal ended, another set of chores began. Bowls needed cleaning. Animals received one final check. Doors were secured. Tools left outside were brought in. Clothing that had become wet during the day might be hung near the fire to dry overnight. Even these ordinary tasks mattered. Replacing a tool was expensive. Losing food to animals could mean going hungry later. Preparation was part of survival. As daylight faded even further, homes became quieter. The amount of available light dropped quickly. Candles and oil lamps could be lit, but people used them carefully. A candle was not something to burn just because a room felt a little dim. It represented time, effort, and money. Many households owned only a few candles at once. The wealthy could afford beeswax candles, which burned brighter and cleaner. Most ordinary families relied on cheaper tallow candles made from animal fat. They worked well enough, but they smoked, dripped, and produced a smell that probably would not become today's most popular scented candle. Fresh medieval tallow. It is safe to say the gift shops would struggle with that one. Because light was valuable, families often gathered together in one room instead of spreading throughout the house. Everyone stayed close to the fire or the single candle that was burning. Children might help repair clothing. Someone might spin wool into thread. Before electricity, light was never free. That may sound obvious, but it is easy to forget just how much we take light for granted today. You wake up before sunrise, flip a switch, and your room is bright. You walk into the kitchen, another switch. The bathroom, another switch. If one light is not enough, you turn on 3 more without giving it a second thought. For most of human history, every bit of light came with a price. If you wanted your home to be brighter, someone had to make that possible. There were no power stations quietly humming in the distance. No miles of electrical wires stretching across the countryside. Light had to be created by hand, and keeping the darkness away, even for a few hours, required time, money, and constant effort. Imagine finishing supper as the sun disappears below the horizon. The room grows darker with every passing minute. Faces become harder to see. Objects slowly fade into the shadows. Soon, the only choice is simple. Either light a candle, or accept that your day is almost over. For many ordinary families, the second option was often the wiser one. Candles may seem small today, but in the past they were valuable household items. People did not burn them carelessly. A candle was not something you lit because you felt like reading another chapter of a book until midnight. It was used because there was a genuine need. Every minute the flame burned meant the candle became a little shorter, and once it was gone, someone had to buy another one, or make one. Making candles was hardly a quick afternoon hobby. The most common candles used by ordinary people were made from tallow, a type of rendered animal fat. If that sounds less than pleasant, your nose would probably agree. Tallow candles gave off light, but they also produced smoke. They dripped wax. They flickered whenever a draught entered the room. And perhaps most famously, they carried a smell that reminded everyone exactly where they came from. It was not the relaxing scent of vanilla or lavender. It was more like farmyard with a hint of sheep. Still, they were affordable compared to better options. Wealthier households often preferred beeswax candles. These burned brighter, they lasted longer, they produced less smoke, and they smelled surprisingly pleasant, with a gentle honey-like scent. Walking into a wealthy home lit by beeswax candles must have felt quite different from entering a peasant cottage filled with smoky tallow flames. Even the quality of light reflected social class. But candles were only one source of illumination. Across different cultures and centuries, people also relied on oil lamps. These had been used for thousands of years. Ancient Romans filled small clay lamps with olive oil. Other regions burned fish oil, sesame oil, walnut oil, or animal fats, depending on what was available. The basic idea remained the same. A small wick drew fuel upward, and the flame provided enough light to push back the darkness, at least a little. Oil lamps were useful, but they had their own problems. The fuel had to be purchased or produced. The wick needed replacing. The flame demanded careful attention. Too much smoke blackened walls and ceilings. Too little fuel meant the light disappeared. Nothing about nighttime lighting was effortless. Even fireplaces contributed to evening light. The glowing flames dancing inside the hearth helped families cook, stay warm, and see one another after sunset. Yet fireplaces were never designed to light an entire room. The corners remained dark. Shadows stretched across wooden walls. A person standing just a few steps away could disappear into the gloom. Modern homes aim for even lighting. Historic homes were full of contrasts. Bright near the fire, dark almost everywhere else. Because light was limited, people naturally adjusted their behavior. Instead of everyone spreading throughout the house, families gathered close together. The brightest spot became the center of evening life. Children listened to stories. Parents repaired clothing. Grandparents shared old memories. Neighbors occasionally visited if they lived nearby. Everyone stayed where the light reached. The darkness beyond seemed to gently encourage togetherness. Reading, for those who could read, was usually done close to the flame. Books themselves were expensive, and reading by candlelight required patience. The flickering light constantly shifted across the page. Tiny letters became difficult to see. Eyes grew tired more quickly than they would under modern lighting. If you've ever complained that your phone screen is too dim at night, imagine trying to read a handwritten manuscript beside a candle that keeps leaning to one side because the table is uneven. Suddenly, your screen brightness feels rather luxurious. Artists, scribes, and scholars faced similar challenges. Detailed work after sunset became slower and more difficult. Many preferred to use daylight whenever possible. After all, sunlight was the brightest and cheapest light available. It simply disappeared every evening, whether anyone was ready or not. Businesses also felt the limits of darkness. Most shops closed soon after sunset. Craftsmen stopped working. Markets emptied. Without reliable lighting, accidents became more likely. Sharp tools and poor visibility rarely make a good combination. Even cities became quieter. Unlike today's skylines glowing through the night, medieval and early modern towns faded into darkness. A few lanterns might hang outside important buildings. Watchmen carried lamps as they walked the streets. Some inns welcomed late travelers with warm lights spilling from their windows. But compared to a modern city, the difference would be astonishing. From a nearby hill, you might see only scattered points of light. Everything else would be swallowed by the night. Travel after dark became much more difficult for exactly the same reason. Roads were uneven. Bridges could be narrow. Signposts were rare. One weak lantern illuminated only a few steps ahead. A cloudy night without moonlight could make even familiar paths feel uncertain. Many travelers simply preferred to stop for the evening rather than risk an accident. This is one reason inns became so important along major roads. If darkness caught you far from home, finding shelter before night fully arrived was often the safest choice. Weather made everything even harder. A strong wind could blow out a candle. Rain soaked torches. Cold temperatures stiffened fingers trying to relight a flame. Sometimes darkness won simply because keeping a light burning became too difficult. Yet despite all these limitations, people adapted remarkably well. They became experts at using every available minute of daylight. Morning was for work. Afternoon was for finishing important tasks. Evening was for slowing down. Night was for resting. This rhythm shaped human life for countless generations. It also shaped sleep itself. When darkness arrived, people did not usually fight it. They accepted it. The fading light gently signaled that the body should begin preparing for rest, long before anyone knew words like circadian rhythm or melatonin. Without realizing it, They were often living in closer harmony with their natural body clocks than many of us do today. Of course, there were exceptions. Kings held feasts that stretched late into the evening. Monasteries sometimes remained awake for nighttime prayers. Celebrations, weddings, festivals, and religious holidays could keep entire communities awake long after sunset. But those were special occasions. Ordinary life followed a quieter pattern. The darkness was not an inconvenience to conquer. It was simply part of the day. As the last candle burned lower and lower, its flame shrinking with each passing minute, families understood that they had reached the end of another day. Soon, someone would gently pinch out the wick or cover the lamp. The room would fall silent, the shadows would return, and once again, people would discover what every generation before electricity knew by heart. Night belonged to the darkness. If someone from the Middle Ages suddenly walked into your bedroom today, they might think you were royalty. A soft mattress, clean sheets, a warm blanket, a window with glass, a lamp on the bedside table, maybe even a fan or air conditioner humming quietly in the background. And if you happened to have 6 pillows on your bed, well, they might assume you were the king of a very comfortable kingdom. For most of history, bedrooms were much simpler. In fact, many people did not even have a room that could truly be called a bedroom. The idea of having one room just for sleeping is surprisingly modern. For countless generations, people slept wherever there was space. If you were a wealthy noble living in a grand manor or castle, you might have several private chambers. But if you were an ordinary farmer, craftsman, or labourer, your entire home may have consisted of just one large room. That single room had to do everything. It was the kitchen, the dining room, the workshop, the family room, and when night arrived, it became the bedroom too. As evening settled in, furniture was often moved around to make space for sleeping. Some people slept on simple wooden beds. Others rolled out straw-filled mattresses on the floor. Children might sleep together. Older relatives found a place near the fire where it stayed a little warmer during cold nights. There was very little privacy. Modern families often expect everyone to have their own bedroom. Some people even complain when they have to share a hotel room for one weekend. Centuries ago, sharing your sleeping space with your entire family was simply normal. Parents, children, grandparents, sometimes even visiting relatives. Everyone found a place. In smaller homes, personal space was a luxury that hardly existed. This close living arrangement had its advantages. Parents could quickly comfort a crying child. The warmth from several people sleeping together helped keep everyone a little warmer during cold winters. Families felt connected in ways that are difficult to imagine today. Of course, it also meant that if one person snored, everyone knew about it. Some things truly never change. The beds themselves were nothing like the thick memory foam mattresses many of us enjoy today. A basic bed usually started with a wooden frame. Across the frame, ropes or strips of woven material stretched from side to side to support the mattress. These ropes slowly loosened over time. Every so often they needed to be tightened again. This is where the famous phrase, "sleep tight," is often said to come from. Whether the saying has exactly that origin is still debated by historians, but rope-supported beds certainly did exist, and keeping them tight made sleeping much more comfortable. Otherwise, the middle of the bed would sag like an old hammock. The mattress placed on top was usually stuffed with whatever materials were easy to find. Straw was one of the most common fillings. Hay sometimes appeared as well. In wealthier homes, people could afford softer stuffing like feathers, wool, or down. A feather mattress was considered a sign of comfort and success. Most ordinary people, however, were perfectly familiar with straw. Fresh straw could be reasonably comfortable at first, but over time it became flattened. It collected dust. Sometimes insects found it just as appealing as the humans sleeping on top of it. Every so often the old straw had to be replaced with fresh material. It was simply another household chore. Sheets were usually made from linen if a family could afford them. Linen came from flax plants and was durable enough to survive years of use. Cotton, which is common today, was not nearly as widespread in many parts of Europe. Blankets are often made of wool, heavy, warm, sometimes a little scratchy. Still, on a freezing winter night, scratchy was much better than cold. One feature of historic beds often surprises modern visitors. Bed curtains. Many beds, especially those owned by wealthier families, had thick curtains hanging all around them. These curtains were not only decorative, they served several practical purposes. First, they trapped heat. Most homes were difficult to warm evenly. Even if the fireplace was burning brightly, much of the heat escaped through roofs, doors, and tiny cracks in the walls. Closing bed curtains created a small pocket of warmer air around the sleeper. Second, the curtains offered a little privacy. Remember, many homes contained several people sharing the same room. Drawing the curtains around your bed created at least the feeling of having your own little corner, even if everyone else was only a few feet away. Castles had another problem entirely. They were enormous. Stone walls looked impressive, but they were terrible at keeping heat inside. Many castle bedrooms felt cold for much of the year. Large fireplaces helped somewhat, but heating every room was almost impossible. Thick curtains around beds became an extra layer of protection against chilly drafts, sneaking through stone walls. Some noble families even hung tapestries on the walls for the same reason. The artwork looked beautiful, but it also helped block the cold. Furniture inside bedrooms was generally limited. A chest stored clothing and valuables. A stool or small bench might sit nearby. Perhaps a simple table held a candle or oil lamp. Mirrors were rare and expensive. Large wardrobes were uncommon. Most people owned far fewer possessions than we do today. There simply was not much furniture to fill a room. Windows were another major difference. Many poorer homes had tiny openings covered by wooden shutters instead of glass. Glass itself was expensive. Even when windows contained glass, it was often uneven and much smaller than modern panes. At night, shutters were closed tightly to keep out wind, rain, and unwanted visitors. This made bedrooms even darker once the candle was extinguished. When the light went out, it truly went out. The room disappeared into darkness. The only remaining glow might come from faint embers in the fireplace. Sometimes people shared their homes with more than just family members. Cats were welcomed because they hunted mice. Dogs often slept indoors as loyal companions and useful guards. In some poorer homes, especially during harsh winters, small farm animals might even be brought inside temporarily for warmth or protection. It may sound unusual today, but survival often mattered more than comfort. Bedrooms also had very few of the conveniences we barely notice now. There were no alarm clocks waiting to ring, no electric blankets warming the mattress beforehand, no humidifiers, no white noise machines playing gentle rainfall sounds. If you wanted to hear nature while falling asleep, you simply listened through the window, and nature was happy to provide. The wind rustled through trees, owls called across fields. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance. Rain tapped softly against the roof. Occasionally, the sound of footsteps outside reminded everyone that the night watchman was making his rounds. Despite their simplicity, these bedrooms were places of safety. After a long day of hard work, climbing into bed, whether it was stuffed with feathers or straw, meant the day's labor was finally over. The door was locked. The fire had burned low. The family gathered close together. Outside, the night stretched across fields and villages beneath a sky full of stars. Inside, under heavy blankets, and behind thick bed curtains or beside a simple straw mattress, another generation prepared for sleep. The rooms may have looked very different from our own, but the feeling was familiar. The quiet relief that comes when the day is done, the comfort of being home, and the hope that tomorrow would bring another sunrise. Tonight, your bed is probably waiting for you. You likely did not spend much time thinking about it today. It is simply there, quietly doing its job. You climb in, pull up the blanket, find the cool side of the pillow if you're lucky, and hope you fall asleep before your brain decides it is the perfect time to remember something embarrassing you said 5 years ago. Beds are so ordinary that we rarely stop to wonder where they came from. But the bed has one of the longest and most fascinating histories of any piece of furniture in your home. People have been trying to make sleep more comfortable for thousands of years. The earliest humans did not have beds at all, at least not in the way we imagine them today. For a very long time, people simply slept on the ground. At first, this may have been nothing more than a patch of soft grass, leaves, or animal skins spread across the earth. It was simple, it was practical. And after spending an entire day hunting, gathering food, or traveling across rough landscapes, it was probably good enough. But sleeping directly on the ground had plenty of problems. The earth could be cold, rain could soak everything. Small insects were eager to become unexpected bedtime guests, and larger animals occasionally had their own ideas about where they wanted to spend the night. Slowly, people began searching for better solutions. Instead of sleeping directly on the ground, they piled together branches, reeds, dried grass, and leaves. These early sleeping places raised the body just enough to provide a little comfort and insulation. It was not luxury, but it was progress. As civilizations grew, so did the bed. In ancient Egypt, wealthy families slept on wooden beds, raised well above the floor. Some even had carved legs shaped like animal paws. These beds often looked surprisingly elegant. The Egyptians understood that raising a sleeper above the ground helped avoid dust, insects, and dampness. Sometimes they even used small headrests made from wood or stone instead of pillows. Comfort, it seems, meant something a little different back then. Trying to sleep with your head resting on carved stone might sound challenging today, though perhaps it would discourage scrolling on your phone before bed. The ancient Greeks and Romans also valued good beds. Wealthier citizens owned wooden frames fitted with woven ropes or leather strips that supported soft mattresses. Some mattresses were stuffed with wool, others used feathers. Fine blankets and colourful fabrics showed both wealth and taste. Roman homes often included beautifully decorated bedrooms where comfort became a sign of status. A nice bed quietly announced that life was treating you rather well. For ordinary people, however, life was much simpler. Most slept on straw-filled sacks laid across wooden frames or even directly on the floor. The difference between rich and poor became very clear once bedtime arrived. That pattern continued throughout the Middle Ages. If you visited a peasant's home, the bed might look rather plain. A rough wooden frame, a mattress stuffed with straw, a wool blanket, perhaps one linen sheet if the family was fortunate. Nothing about it was designed to impress visitors. It existed for one purpose: to help tired people rest before another demanding day of work. In castles and noble houses, the story was entirely different. A lord's bed was often one of the most expensive pieces of furniture in the entire building. Some were enormous. Heavy carved wooden posts rose toward the ceiling. Rich fabrics draped from every side. Brightly coloured curtains surrounded the mattress. Embroidered blankets displayed wealth. Soft feather beds rested beneath carefully stitched linen sheets. These beds were not hidden away in small private rooms. Quite the opposite. Important guests were sometimes welcomed into the bedchamber itself. Kings and queens occasionally received visitors while sitting in bed. Business could be discussed there. Political meetings took place there. Even formal ceremonies sometimes happened beside the bed. To modern eyes, that may seem unusual. Today, inviting someone into your bedroom for an official meeting would probably raise a few eyebrows. In the past, the bedchamber was one of the warmest and most comfortable rooms in the house. It made perfect sense. The famous four-poster bed also became popular during this period. Its tall wooden posts supported thick curtains hanging on every side. These curtains served practical purposes. They trapped precious warmth during cold nights. They blocked chilly drafts. They offered a little privacy in busy households. And they helped keep insects away, at least some of the time. In large stone castles, they could make the difference between a reasonably comfortable night and one spent wondering if winter had somehow moved into the bedroom. Mattresses had to be aired out. Straw needed replacing. Feather beds had to be shaken and fluffed. Sheets were washed by hand, which was no small task. Without washing machines, every blanket and sheet demanded hours of labour. Water had to be carried. Soap had to be made or purchased. Everything was scrubbed by hand before drying outdoors. Keeping a bed clean required real effort. Cleanliness also helped fight one of history's least welcome bedtime companions, bed bugs. Unfortunately, these tiny insects have been bothering sleeping humans for thousands of years. Archaeologists have even found evidence of them in ancient settlements. It turns out they have enjoyed our company for a very long time. People tried many different methods to keep them away. Some hung herbs around the bed. Others regularly exposed bedding to fresh air and sunlight. None of these methods worked perfectly. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, looked at the clock, sighed dramatically and thought, well, tomorrow is ruined? If so, you are not alone. Today, many of us believe that a good night's sleep means falling asleep once, staying asleep for 7 or 8 uninterrupted hours, and waking up only when the alarm insists that it is time to face reality. If that does not happen, we often assume something has gone wrong, but for much of history, waking up in the middle of the night was not considered a problem at all. In fact, many people expected it. For centuries across Europe, and in several other parts of the world as well, people commonly slept in 2 separate parts. The first was called the first sleep. The second was called the second sleep. Between them came a quiet period of wakefulness that could last anywhere from half an hour to 2 hours. To modern ears, that sounds unusual. To people living before electric lighting, it was simply normal. The evidence for this forgotten pattern appears in surprising places. Historians have found references to first sleep and second sleep in personal diaries, medical books, court records, letters, poems, and even old religious writings. People mentioned them so casually that they rarely bothered to explain what they meant. that is often a clue that something was widely understood. It would be a little like someone today writing, "After breakfast, I went to work." No one explains what breakfast is because everyone already knows. In the same way, people centuries ago casually wrote about waking after their first sleep before returning to bed for their second. So what did a typical night actually look like? Imagine a farming family living in a small village. The sun disappears. Supper is finished. The animals are secure. The fire burns low. Around 8 or 9 in the evening, everyone climbs into bed. Soon the house grows silent. The family falls asleep. Several hours pass. Then, sometime around midnight, people wake up. Not because of a loud noise, not because someone forgot to silence their phone. There were no phones, thankfully. They simply reached the natural end of their first sleep. Instead of panicking, they stretched, sat up, or quietly got out of bed. The house was still dark. Only glowing embers remained at the fireplace. Moonlight sometimes slipped through tiny windows. Outside, the village rested beneath a sky full of stars. This peaceful period between sleeps had many different uses. Some people prayed. Religious writers often recommended these quiet nighttime hours as an ideal time for reflection because the world was so calm. Others simply sat beside the fire for a while. Some added another log to the hearth. Others checked on animals if they heard an unusual sound outside. A few people read if they could afford books and did not mind spending precious candlelight. Many simply talked. Husbands and wives sometimes used this quiet time for conversation that never seemed possible during the busy daylight hours. The children were asleep. The chores were finished. Tomorrow could wait a little longer. Medical writers from the time even suggested that this period between sleeps was one of the healthiest times for couples to conceive children, believing the body was especially relaxed after several hours of rest. Whether or not that idea was scientifically correct, it shows just how normal this sleeping pattern was. No one considered the middle of the night unusual. It was simply another part of daily life. Eventually people grew sleepy again, without forcing it, without counting sheep, without wondering whether they had broken their sleep schedule. They simply returned to bed. The second sleep carried them gently toward sunrise. By morning, they often felt well rested. Today, researchers sometimes describe this pattern as segmented sleep or biphasic sleep. Interestingly, modern experiments have shown that when people spend several weeks without artificial evening light, many naturally begin drifting toward a similar rhythm. After sunset, they become sleepy earlier. They sleep for several hours, wake peacefully for a short time, then fall asleep again before dawn. It seems our ancestors may not have been sleeping strangely at all. Perhaps we are the unusual ones. So why did this centuries-old habit disappear? The answer, once again, is light. As candles became cheaper, oil lamps improved and eventually gas lamps illuminated growing cities, people gradually stayed awake later into the evening. Factories also changed daily life. The Industrial Revolution introduced fixed work schedules that cared very little about natural sunsets. Workers needed to arrive on time regardless of how dark it had been the night before. Electricity completed the transformation. Once homes could be brightly lit at any hour, bedtime slowly drifted later and later. Instead of going to sleep a few hours after sunset, people remained awake deep into the evening. The first sleep and second sleep slowly blended together into one longer block. Within only a few generations, the old pattern had almost vanished from everyday life. Eventually, people forgot it had ever existed. Doctors even began treating nighttime waking as something unusual. Yet history suggests that for countless generations, waking briefly during the night may have been perfectly natural. Of course, that does not mean everyone should try to split their sleep into two parts today. Modern work schedules, school shift work, and countless responsibilities make that difficult for most people. Our lives operate very differently from those of medieval farmers. Still, there is something oddly comforting about this forgotten habit. The next time you wake during the night and lie quietly listening to the silence, remember that millions of people before electricity may have been doing exactly the same thing. Not worrying, not checking the time every 3 minutes, not wondering whether tomorrow was ruined, simply accepting that the night was not always meant to be slept through in one uninterrupted stretch. Perhaps they whispered a short prayer. Perhaps they added another piece of wood to the fire. Perhaps they stepped outside for a moment and looked up. The stars would still be there. The village would still be asleep. The cool night air would drift gently across empty fields. And after a little while, with the fire glowing softly behind them and the world wrapped in silence, they would return beneath their blankets once more. The first sleep had ended. The second sleep was waiting, and for centuries that quiet rhythm carried countless generations peacefully from sunset to sunrise. And now, our journey through the quiet nights of the past comes gently to an end. As the fire burns lower and the last candle slowly fades, it is worth remembering just how different the world once was. For thousands of years, darkness was not something people tried to escape. It was simply part of life. It arrived every evening without asking permission, and with it came a slower rhythm that shaped every family, every village, and every generation. People planned their days around the sun, treasured every small source of light, and accepted that when night arrived, much of the world would simply have to wait until morning. They slept in humble cottages and grand castles, on straw mattresses and feather beds, beside crackling fires and beneath heavy blankets. They listened to the wind outside, the distant call of an owl, the soft breathing of family members nearby, and the quiet sounds of a world resting together. Many of the comforts we hardly notice today would have seemed almost magical to them. Warm rooms, bright lights, soft mattresses, glass windows, and the ability to turn night into day with the touch of a switch would have been beyond imagination. Yet despite everything that has changed, some things have remained exactly the same. The relief of finally finishing a long day, the comfort of returning home, the peaceful feeling of climbing into bed, the hope that tomorrow will bring another sunrise. These are experiences that connect us with every generation that came before us. Perhaps that is one of the quiet lessons history offers. Even though our world looks very different, the people who lived centuries ago were not so different from us. They laughed with their families, worried about tomorrow, found comfort beside the fire, and looked up at the same stars that still shine above us tonight. So, as you settle a little deeper into your pillow, let your thoughts drift as gently as the evening smoke rising from a distant chimney. Imagine the little village growing silent once more. The doors are closed, the animals are asleep, the last footsteps fade into the darkness. Somewhere, a watchman continues his slow walk beneath the moon. Somewhere else, a tired family has already drifted into their first sleep, waiting quietly for another peaceful morning. There is nothing left to do tonight. No fields to tend, no candles to make, no firewood to gather. Only the quiet company of the night. Thank you for spending this evening with me and exploring what sleep was like before electricity. If you enjoyed this peaceful journey through history, I hope you'll join me again for another story. But for now, the fire has burned low, the village is asleep, the stars remain overhead, and the night, just as it has for countless generations, gently invites us to rest. Sleep well, and until next time, good night.